So recently we got news on the 4 new Nova Flares coming out in 4.4. Jiaoqiu, sure. Topaz makes sense. Argenti, honestly deserved. But then Sunday? Now, personally, I would have preferred someone like Lingsha or Fugue, but the more I thought about it, the more it actually started to make sense. Back in 4.2, we got Hoho's Nova Flare, which we could reason that it was because of Evanesica. But with Argenti and Sunday's Nova Flare, plus news on a Saber upscale, there's a very suspicious pattern going on. It seems like we're about to get an energy meta revival. But if we're getting a revival or Nova Flare, it either means A, they suck, or B, they fell off. And well, looking at Argenti, Saber, and Sunday, yeah, it checks out. So today, before we get our new Nova Flares, let's find out what the hell happened to our energy hypercarries and see if Hoyo will address their issues with this upcoming patch. Plus, we'll get to see a bit of Evanesica a bit later on too. Now, to start off my video, let's go over the anger of the energy archetype, Sunday. Sunday, at least in my eyes, has always been a meta support. Whenever a new DPS comes out, Sunday is always at least attempted to be paired with them. And for any older hypercarries, this man was basically their savior. But even when putting half the roster on his back, he still got demoted to tier 0.5, which honestly was pretty shocking, but let's find out if it was actually warranted. Now, Sunday is known for 3 things: high buffs, an extra action via -1, and energy via his ult. Now, these 3 traits have kept the meta for the past year, but is it just not enough anymore, or has the meta shifted? Well, after making my video, I do believe it's actually a mix of both. So let's actually break down what Sunday provides. At a baseline, he gives 20 crit rate, roughly 87 crit damage, plus 30 or 80 damage bonus. To simplify, let's just use 107 crit damage. Now, at first glance, those buffs do sound really good. And honestly, a year ago, they were. But in the current meta, Sunday buffs have actually become one of the weakest in the game, especially for our energy carries. And this is because of oversaturation. 1.x and 2.x units simply didn't have that many self buffs in their base kit, and our builds back then also weren't that good. So if your DPS started with, say, 200 crit damage, then Sunday giving another 100 was basically giving us a 50% damage increase via the crit alone. However, modern units are just built different. Whether it's the self buffs or newer supports, it's pretty common to now hover near 400 crit damage in combat. So applying the exact same crit damage buffs, what was once a 50% increase is now barely 25%. And the same goes for damage bonus. So in this department, Sunday definitely needs some improvement with his Nova Flare, whether it's more diversified buffs or higher numbers. But there's also another major issue. You see, in modern day Star Rail, people look at Sunday as the -1 energy support, but that actually wasn't his original niche. Sunday was originally designed to be a summon and memo sprite support, basically a dedicated support for characters like Genuine and the entire 3.x Remembrance archetype, which, well, we all know what happened to the second part. Anyways, this matters a lot because nearly half of Sunday's kit is locked behind a summon, which if you don't, you straight up lose 50% damage bonus. And when looking at the numbers, that's really bad. Looking at my universal chart, we can see that a full power Sunday is actually a pretty respectable support in a vacuum. However, if we take that 50 damage bonus away, well, he's now one of the weakest supports in the game. Now, of course, you could fix this issue by running Danheng PT to provide a summon, but that's exactly my point. Sunday isn't really used as a summon support. He's again a general hypercarry and energy support. Emphasis on the energy part. For our energy DPSs, well, the best sustain isn't Danheng PT, it's Huohuo, who doesn't give a summon. Which means characters like Argenti, Saber, and a bit of Evanesica are basically forced to use a Lex Cutoff Sunday, which breaks the performance of already weak DPSs. Not you though, Evanesica, you're still very strong, unlike these other 2 bricks. So funnily enough, one of the biggest things holding Sunday back is the fact that he was designed for a meta that never existed. So for the people who pulled Sunday for casters back then, I give you my condolences. Regardless, to fix this issue, I believe we can just take a page out of RMC's book, no pun intended, and say, if X unit has 0 energy or above Y max energy, then give them Z amounts of amp. Now, in my opinion, I think it'd be really nice if they switch the damage bonus to something say like Defense Shred, similar to what happened to Sparkle. And if they do, we'll be seeing a lot more Sunday in teams like Evanesica, Anaxa, and of course Finan. Moving on though, we now have his extra actions. Sunday in this regard has always been special and invaluable. For any hyper carries who is a majority of their team's damage, the common perception was something like this. If we give the DPS another turn, we literally will deal double the damage and at the same time battery them faster. But how true is this? Well, for a majority of users, we basically are getting an extra skill or basic. But generally, the skill does a frick all damage. Looking at the meta DPSs, I have organized them into whether or not their general skill or basic actually does a majority of their damage. Basically, just look at which units are green. And for the most part, there's actually not too many of them. So while we do get double the skills, we're also generally doubling the dookie damage aspect of their kit. Now, for many older units, giving them double the skills was actually doubling their damage, say Arlene for example. But for newer units, they focus on other things such as their ults, follow-ups, or weird mechanics, thus rendering the best part of his kit as just okay. Using Evanesica, getting an extra 300k skill is pretty nice, but my elation skills are dealing around 1 million, meanwhile my ults are hitting for 3, so it's a pretty tiny drop in the bucket. So for this second aspect, how can we fix this? Well, in regards to the extra action, this aspect is purely dependent on the teammate. If they have strong skills and can properly utilize this turn, then Sunday is going to be really strong. But if not, then Sunday can't really change that. However, the mechanics itself can be adjusted to fix some current issues. Now, going off of Mr. Alpaca Deck's comment, y'all should go check him out, he's also a pretty cool dude. He mentions how Sunday should instead give an extra turn instead of 100% advance. And this is honestly a pretty cool idea, as it could help with buffs running out, as well as speed tune for units like Aglaya. However, my only issue with this is that it Giga Power Group Sparkle's 160 speed roll, and also makes Redrick kinda useless. Maybe Hoyle plays around with this idea, but we'll just have to see. If anything though, I think it'd be really cool if Sunday's advance caused ally skills or basic to generate 10 to 20 more energy. But moving on to the third and final aspect, we have energy. His extra turns and ult give a sizable amount of energy, with no units currently being able to match this part of his kit. So in this department, he's pretty good and have no issues with it. So to summarize the energy meta's anchor, currently Sunday isn't too bad. His energy generation is basically unmatched and his action events can be very valuable, assuming Hoya wants it to be. However, his issue is that he exists for a meta that never did, thus shafting parts of his kit. Not to mention, the meta has shifted quite a bit from what Sunday was really good for. His raw buffs age poorly because crit and damage percent became oversaturated, his summon mechanics are restrictive because energy teams don't actually want summon teammates, and his action advance, while still strong, no longer automatically doubles your carry's damage. So when Sunday gets his Nova Flare soon enough, hopefully they address these issues. All this to say, while Sunday indeed has some issues, it doesn't change the fact that Saber and Argenti somehow became bricks. Starting with Argenti, is this kit outdated? Absolutely. Are the numbers trash? Definitely. So we're gonna need a full rework. But for the time being, why not make fun of it a little? His talent gives 25 crit rate, his Trace 3 sometimes gives 15% damage bonus, and he sometimes gets 2 energy for his 180 cost ult. And here's his Trace 1. As you can see, absolute dookie. Now in terms of kit synergy, I'll cover this in depth a bit later, but for now let's just look at damage. Damage wise, how bad is it? Well, to get a reference, our new benchmark will be Asheville and Blade. As much as I would like to use Anaxa, people did have a point where he's technically pretty weak without Cyrene or Ceredra. Anyways, we'll be looking at a 5 target scenario for our current characters as all of them have AoE aspects in their kit. I'll be using a set rotation of 12 skills as it's a common factor for Asheville, Blade, Argenti, and also Saber. So, looking at the numbers, Asheville's actually hovering roughly at Argenti's level. But when comparing him to his current competitor, we can see that raw multiplier wise, he is very behind. However, as usual, that's not the full story. We still need to account for the self buffs. So when factoring that in, we can see that Argenti is still miles behind what Blade's currently doing, and Asheville with his extreme self buffs would also giga outdamage Argenti in his ideal situation. So from this, we know that at a baseline, Argenti's kit is severely outdated, and number-wise, also significantly behind our current meta DPSs. With that in mind, I have no doubt that Hoyo is just gonna add entirely new stuff to his kit, as well as greatly adjusting the numbers. So now we understand one reason why Argenti isn't doing so good. His numbers are simply too low. Now, what about Saber? She came out 2 entire versions after, yet even so, has suffered quite a bit. At a glance, her kit does look pretty good. It's quite synergistic and knows what it wants, tapping ally ults to charge her own. She has decent stat amps in her traces, and what looks to be pretty good multipliers, and there's also quality of life stuff such as energy overflow. So, what the hell is going on? Well, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Okay, time's out. Surprisingly, it doesn't actually have to deal much with her kit and its function, but rather its numbers. Would you believe me if I said that Saber has similar MV as Argenti? Well, you should, because it's true. Assuming the same 12 actions, Saber gets in 3 enhanced basics, 12 skills, and also 1 more ult. Yet even so, it's only just slightly more than Argenti. Now, factoring in self buffs, it would further favor Saber, but the fact that it's even this close is crazy. I'm not sure if that's an Argenti upscale or Saber just getting exposed. By the way, I know Saber's a destruction unit, but AoE ult and basic, so yes. Moving on though, and to conclude, I would say that there's actually nothing really wrong with Saber's kit. I'll talk about synergy later, like with Argenti, but for now, just know that Saber, unfortunately, just got shafted with low numbers. Now, I've heard speculation that Gilgamesh's teammate is Saber, but I'm not exactly sure how he can fix this. Unlike Argenti, where they can add a couple of zeros to his kit via his Nova Flare, Gilgamesh either has to be literally made for Saber and add tailor-made buffs. For example, if your name is Saber, gain 40% defense rate and 200 damage bonus, or have some crazy synergy or new attacks that somehow fixes everything. Either way, it's gonna be really interesting to see what they do. Finally though, let's talk about Evanesica, the odd one out of the energy family, and the only one to break its curse. Evanesica's kit should look very familiar to us, as she basically took Saber's entire kit, then slapped on Argenti's element and ult, then called it a day. Which raises a pretty obvious question. If I've just spent most of the video explaining why units like Saber and Argenti are struggling, how is Evanesica, a character who blatantly copied both of their kits, somehow one of the best DPSs in the game? Well, unlike the rest of her energy family, Evanesica has a lot going for her. To start off, unlike the other two, she actually has damage. Like, a lot of damage. Now, what's interesting is that self-buff and normal multiplier wise, she's honestly pretty similar to Saber, which should in turn make her pretty mid. But we then add in her elation multipliers, and holy do these tiny numbers do damage. To give a general idea, Saber's ult does 1380% in single target, while Evanesica's at 1240%. Now, when we look at Evanesica's ult damage distribution, you can see just how much extra damage she's getting from those elation multipliers. But not only does she hit like a truck, it's the frequency that she can do it. Unlike Saber or Argenti, whose gameplay is pretty static, Evanesia's mastered the random BS go method. With her having access to elation skills and also a follow-up attack, she's basically a pseudo follow-up DPS, which TLDR is just more raw MVs being injected into her kit. Now realistically, I don't think the other two DPSs need to copy Evanesia in this regard. At the end of the day, these are still just additional numbers. As long as their base kit has high enough scaling, then they don't need all these additional attacks in their kit. With that in mind though, I do believe that Evanesia is what a modernized energy DPS should look like. Very high damage numbers, consistent damage output, and most importantly, having perfect synergy with her team and role as an energy DPS. And it's because of this final reason that I wanted to make this video today, because this is what Saber and Argenti really needs to make them good and age well. The way Evanesia and her team functions is like the perfect perpetual machine, and we can see this by the way they get energy. So let's compare the three DPSs in this regard. Starting with Argenti, he gains 2 energy when enemies enter combat. With this, Argenti literally has no room for team synergy or growth, not to mention it barely gives any energy. As such, he's stuck with a 4-turn ult rotation and forced to rely on teammates battering him to speed this process up. For reference, 2-turn ults is the current baseline in my opinion, with high investment or meta teams having 1. Moving to Saber though, she gets 24 energy when allies ult. As I mentioned prior, Saber knows what she wants. Allies who can ult frequently or battery the team like Huohuo are vital. In a normal rotation with 3 ally ults, that's roughly 72 energy, which if we add the overflow from the next rotation over, it'll allow her to consistently get 3-turn ults. Unlike Argenti, she actually scales off her teammates and thus has room for improvement. Allies with faster spamming ults or are able to battery the entire team like Huohuo can lead to very fast ult gen. However, the issue with Saber is, again, tiny PP numbers. All of that work for a drop of blood. And finally, there's Evanesia. Her unique mechanic is that she gets 1 energy per 1 certified banger, but at the same time, she gets 50% of the banger received and lost by allies, which is similar to Saber in a sense where they're both using their teammates to gain energy. But how good is this actually though? Well, assuming you have Yaoguang and EMC and everyone only skills, Evanesia can generally get a 2-turn ult. Yes, even without any ally ults, Evanesia not only has the strongest, but also fastest ult of the bunch. But how is that possible? When we look at the punchline or certified banger values provided by our elation supports, they literally give 3. Yes, 3, while Evanesia's skill gives 10. In no universe should 2 turns of Evanesia, Yaoguang, and EMC skills be generating anywhere close to 240 energy. But it does somehow. And it's because Evanesia is quite literally cheating the system and making energy come out of nowhere. Answer me this, when EMC does a skill and makes 3 punchline, how much energy does this make for Evanesia? Option A, 3, B, 6, C, 9, or D, 12. Well, if you answered B, C, or D, then you'd be correct. As for the people who answered A, clearly 3 doesn't mean 3. Anyways, at first glance, you may think it looks something like this. You make 3 punchline and then it gets funneled to Evanesia. Gain 50 and lose 50% for a total of 3. But that's not what actually happens. Instead, we get double to quadruple the amount. Yes, a lot more than expected. And it's all thanks to AHA, because the banger generated by punchline actually gets distributed to the entire team. So instead of this, it's actually like this. Now imagine the entire elation team doing that, which then all gets funneled to Evanesia. At the moment with 2 elation supports, the energy gain looks something like this. 259 energy in 2 turns. Yes, this mechanic is stupid. not to mention the crazy synergy all of these units have with each other. And this is only with 3 elation units. Once they add in a sustain, who acts as a whole nother body and can also help generate punchline, I genuinely have no doubt that Evanesica will be the strongest DPS in the game. In theory, 33 to 50% faster ults just by having an elation sustain. Now, bringing it back to Saber, her process looks a lot simpler, but even so, it's still pretty damn effective. What's crazy is that both Evanesica and Saber are both generally generating around 120 energy per turn. But despite generating similar amounts, the payoff is just so much worse for Saber. With that in mind, I hope you understand just how perfect Evanesica's situation actually is, and what's needed from Argenti and Saber for them to be good. They need solid numbers, but more importantly, they need to heavily synergize with their teammates to increase their raw damage output. If they don't have this cheese factor that most modern units have, whether it's follow-up or remembrance or elation's crazy energy gain, then they're just gonna end up as a Jingliu 2 and slowly fall off again. As for Sunday, please save these bums. And yeah, that's the whole video. Hopefully it was a pretty fun and informative watch though. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching and peace.